Hello, Feminine Roadmappers. Welcome back to Feminine Roadmap Inspires. And today, my storyteller is Nancy E. Head. She has written Restoring the Shattered, and she is a woman who has gone through single motherhood of 5 children, poverty, getting herself up out of that, taking herself back to university to get a degree and become a teacher. And now she helps other people overcome poverty. So without further ado, Nancy, thank you so much for saying yes to me.
Thank you so much for having me, Gina. It's great to be here.
Well, without further ado, I would love to have you just share your story with my audience.
Well, I was a single mother with 5 children. My baby was 7 months old. My oldest child had just turned 10, and we found ourselves by ourselves. And that was very difficult, the kind of traumatic, kids reacting in different ways, the community reaching out, and you go through all kinds of things. It's horror, embarrassment, you feel like a failure, all these horrible feelings. And my ex-husband had a lot of trouble making up his mind where he wanted to be and with whom. And so I, through the advice of many people, and it's so difficult to go through these things alone. So I relied on several trusted friends, and the real crux was just wait him out. And that sounds, especially today, with people coming and going, basically, but 3 years I waited to let him make up his mind. And I was glad I did, because I didn't hold the responsibility for having the home falling apart. And I think he was trying to wait me out so that he could not have the responsibility of the home falling apart. Once it became clear where he was going to go and that he was not going to be here anymore, my father in particular urged me to go back to college. It was kind of an ironic, vicarious encouraging too. My dad had been in college when Pearl Harbor came to be, enlisted in the Navy, and since he was had some college, and he had been studying pharmacy, they made him a pharmacist mate, a chief petty officer, and he shipped off to the South Pacific, where, praise God, he saw no combat, and came home, married my mother, and were actually, to not get into too much detail, they got married before the war ended. A year later, my brother is there, and there's no place to live. All these GIs just came home, and so they're living in somebody's dining room, and studying is impossible because you have an infant and you have this little room. And somebody offered him a job as a pharmaceutical salesman, and he took that job and ran with it for the rest of his career. He wanted me to be a pharmacist, and I said to my father, I work at a bank. When I make a mistake at the bank, I debit this and I credit that, and the mistake is fixed and nobody dies. I'm not going in pharmacy. So I went back to college. Now, at this point in time, I'm a part-time bank teller with a tendency to transpose numbers. Not a good career plan. And it did take me a while in college. I tell young people this all the time. Go to college, take a few classes, something will grab you. If you can't make up your mind, you go. Well, English grabbed me, and I loved my English instructors, and I got a degree in English. But signing up for the 4-year degree, I had subsidized daycare for my job at the bank. I have 2 kids in daycare, 3 kids in school. I lost my daycare. Now, the $5 a week I'm paying for 2 children to have lunch and really good care and all kinds of things that they got at daycare is going to cost me $48. I'm still working part-time at the bank, but not as many hours, and the hours are very limited. Now you're going to take this gigantic chunk out, and hello, I'm trying to improve myself here. But women in the church stepped up, and somebody watched my kids for $40 a week, saving, okay, $8 is $8, but we moved all around. And the beautiful irony of it, we stayed put, but we moved from daycare provider to daycare provider, and the kids went to preschool and things like this, things I had not done with my other children. mother was preschool back then. But the beautiful irony of it is that the last caretaker, when my son was just in kindergarten, he needed care 5 afternoons a week, she would not allow me to pay her more than $5. So that original price that I was paying back for the subsidy, and 4 years later, I'm paying $5 a week for this woman, and who fed him lunch. I mean, she had to be paying more than $5 to feed him. So the church stepped around us. The community, a community of believers stepped around us. And there were the people I went to church with. Sometimes they'd provide Thanksgiving dinner. Sometimes somebody'd knock on the door and hand me a Christmas card and had a check inside. Sometimes there'd just be boxes of food left on the front porch. But there was this broader community because I had been involved in the pro-life community for a number of years. And so this broader community that wasn't just my denominational flavor, also encouraging me occasionally, however they could. Just in even how to study or what I could study or what career path I might find. All kinds of ways like that. And that was the beauty of it. There was another thing that seemed to make a difference for me. I had 3 friends that encouraged me at the time. One was also a single mother. She was already a student. I looked at her and said, if she can do it, I can do it. And our kids spent time together. And it was actually very beneficial for both of us to have each other. We could complain about our ex-husbands together. Let's be honest, ladies, that's what we do. We could do that. We could say, I've got this problem with this child, or I have it. We shared meals. We did all kinds of things. We traded assets sometimes. We traded babysitting. So there was that. But the 2 other friends walked through me. They had been friends before. One I sat in the church nursery with our my 4th child, her 1st child, my 5th child, her 2nd child, and you spend hours in the church nursery when you have older children and you have a baby. And we got to know each other so well then. And the other girl was also evangelical, and I knew her from my involvement in the pro-life community. They were married. And this was the interesting thing, that so many times in our churches, we put the single mother in the single mother program, in the singles group. And then you're surrounded with everybody else who has the same problems you do. And that other thing looks so inviting and perfect and wonderful. But me having these married friends, when I did get remarried 11 years later, 11 years after he left, and college and job and everything in between, kids growing up, I get married, and I decided to make my wedding dress old-fashioned. You can see the sewing stuff behind me. But I didn't want to just hem it myself. So I went over to my friend's house, and she's got all the pins and the yardstick and everything. She can pin this and make sure it's not going to look crooked up front there. And I happened to show up for her to pin my dress on the night she was having conflict with her husband. And she was always very encouraging to me, but this particular night she has pins in her mouth saying, "Are you sure you really want to do this again?" and the reality of watching this friend deal with just a little conflict in the moments. Her husband's a police officer, and she dealt with every day, is he going to come home tonight? The other friend of mine, her husband ended up with a chronic illness. So watching these women, you really lose that other life. That's perfect. It's comfortable. It's easy. No, it's not. And then you go in again to this next relationship saying, probably not going to be perfect. Probably going to have moments when it's really hard. So we got through college, and there was a great irony there. I got through college with student loan money and my part-time job. Well, in my last year of college, we got new leadership at my job, and my schedule changed. The class, you have to have this many classes, and they have to be this much. And I couldn't work the same schedule that I worked before, and various other reasons. I didn't have a job anymore. So here I am. I have 1 year to go, and I don't have a job. And then now I can look back and say, well, that was God's wonderful provision. Somehow, some way, we got through that year. Student loan money and whatever else. My father lent me his car and gave me his gas card. So we got through that year, and at the end, the student loan money was gone, and I didn't have a job yet. And that began to tax the storehouse of the kitchen. I lost the peanut, we ran out of peanut butter, we ran out of hot dogs. Peanut butter used to be a lot less expensive. Let me say that. So you run out of peanut butter, you run out of hot dogs. I was running out of tea bags and sugar, and tea was my lifeline. The way some people do coffee, I do tea intravenously. It was my mode of caffeine injection, and we're running out of everything. And somebody gave me a box of food, and I figured out how I can make granola. But I was the only one who actually liked eating it. So we were very limited in our resources. And I sat down and I opened my Bible up to Habakkuk. And I don't remember if there was a devotional I was following or if I just opened the book and there it was. And if you might recall, the 3rd chapter of Habakkuk makes reference to no herd in the stalls, no fruit on the vine, no, there's nothing. But I will rejoice in the Lord. And I thought, there it is. There's the lesson. Rejoice anyway. And I said, all right, Lord, I rejoice. And it wasn't any more excited than that. Just, I rejoice. And I went on, and I didn't expect anything to change. I expected to still have a stack of bills and not very good means to pay them. I believe it was the very next day, I got a stack of mail, and a stack of mail. And I'm thinking, oh, it's another stack of bills I can't pay. And sorting through, I opened the envelope from Penn State. And check for $1,300. And the check stub says, from your student loan account. It has $1,300 extra dollars in my student loan account. But here it is. And the other check was for $50. That was slightly disappointing, actually. That was my deposit that I had doing back then. You sent $50 in to apply. I had forgotten that you could get it back. So, wow, now we're really rejoicing. Now we're going to the grocery store and everybody's going to eat that favorite cereal you want, that thing. Everybody got to pick something. I paid homage to every bill collector who by this point I'm on a first, it's you. How are you doing? The whole bill collector thing. On first name basis with everybody. And so I paid homage to them. A couple of weeks later, I got part-time work in radio, and we had a child support hearing, and we began to find our feet financially. Things began to settle in. Radio is an interesting business, and it's probably the parallels here between this and radio are quite remarkable. And it was just, I remembered what one of my professors has told me: you will learn more after you graduate from college than you learned while you were here. And I didn't know if that was quite possible. So it was. I learned all about the workings of local government, which I'd not taken very much interest in before, because local radio news is about local government. I was much more interested in what was going on a national level, but you have to cover what you have to cover. So radio, it was all very interesting. And of course, these are in the old reel and tape. I'm giving my age away. Reel and tape days, reel to reel tape. So they taught me how to take the weather forecast. And so every day I'm taking the weather forecast, and the meteorologist changes from this guy to that guy. And I begin a friendship with the meteorologist who's up in Massachusetts phoning in our forecast every day. And of course, we're having astounding weather during this period of time. 1993, we had a 30-inch snowfall. 1994, I think we had a couple of 30-inch snowfalls. Then we had the frozen ice domes. For most of the winter, we had 23 degrees below zero. I believe my children in the month of January 1994 went to school 7 times. That's it. So this well, I'm talking to the meteorologist quite frequently at this point. And he was having his own issues up there, and I'm down here. He got a job with the National Weather Service. He's not going to be our meteorologist anymore. He came down to visit us. But he was still married, and they were separated, but I thought, I began to feel very deep conviction that that's a situation I do not belong in yet. I need to stay out of that situation until it resolves itself. And that was enormously difficult because I had spent 9 years waiting for the prince on the white horse to show up. And here he was. He looked great, and it was so cool and such a neat story. And no. So we decided that we would not speak to each other for until it was resolved, and to some degree. And it didn't get resolved for a long time. But in the meantime, I'm walking with my friends through this situation. They've met him. Both friends met him while he was here. And they're walking with me and encouraging me and talking to me. And we're working through this situation. And after a certain period of time, it seemed apparent to everyone that this situation is not going to resolve in a reconciliation. It's just a matter of what it's going to take. So we began to talk on the phone, but we did resolve that we would not see each other until he really was legally free. And that, up in his state, meant that the divorce is final and the papers are signed, and that 90 days goes by after that. So that whole period of waiting was horrible. And then the period afterward was interesting because now we're dealing with courtship. And now we're dealing with what will this look like. And that is, again, as I'm watching my married friends go through the challenges every day, and the realization that this isn't the heaven on earth. This is real life, and it's just a different kind of real life from the one that you're living now. So we went through all of that, and we finally got to the wedding day. And that was when things also, we had children adjusting. My husband lived in a rural community. We live in a very suburban community. My children were not into getting up super early in the morning and doing things outside necessarily, unless it was, for one son, roller hockey, and for the other one, basketball. So we had a lot of adapting to do. I understood and I knew who my kids were, and I thought I knew what their needs were, and he had this vision of how this should go, and we're all trying to learn each other's languages. That is huge. If you're a single mother and you think this is going to be the be all and end all, that's something to watch out for. So the neat thing was that my husband had there are so many neat things, but one of them is that he'd had experience overseas. He was the meteorologist, the site meteorologist for the first Trans-Pacific hot air balloon flight, which was, if you've ever seen Richard Branson on television, the guy who owns Virgin Airlines and Virgin Records, well, he was involved in these hot air balloon flights, and he had made the first transatlantic hot air balloon flight, and he wanted to make the first Trans-Pacific hot air balloon flight, and they had a failed attempt, and they hired my husband to pick the site. So he went all over Japan, and he became fluent in Japanese. He loved Japan. So one of the first things that we did as a married couple was invite Japanese children as exchange students, just a month in the summer. So each one of my sons hosted a Japanese exchange student, and that was kind of cool. And then a few years later, we decided that we would have an exchange student. And I said, well, let's get somebody from China. I'm very interested in China. And my son said, I'm learning German in school. Why don't we get a German? And so that made sense to me. So we got a German student. We did have other students from Asia. We've been to Asia twice to teach English as a second language, which gives you also the opportunity to teach American culture, which includes discussions of things like Thanksgiving and Christmas and Easter, and why we do so many of the things that we do that end up having to be related to Christianity. So these wonderful opportunities came my way, which would not have come my way had I not gone back to school and made all of these attempts to improve myself. So one of the things that we need to understand, what you need when you're going through these situations, is somebody to mentor you, somebody who will encourage you and challenge you. And the challenge is important. That's the part we generally want to avoid. We want that person to walk with us who's really going to tell us what reality is, like my two married friends did. That makes so much difference to keep the practical aspects of life and to understand my life's really hard, but everybody else isn't necessarily a picnic. So that was crucial, to have the mentor, to have the community of people willing to hear what your need is. So I would recommend to everyone to get a church community, because and find the right church. If people aren't willing to listen to what your needs are, go find a community that will. So, but the idea isn't just to have your needs met. The idea is to take your needs today, but encourage you upward. And one of the examples that I put in the book that I think is just such the picture of this is when there's a food pantry in our town, a local retired Marine colonel. If you can imagine, Mr. Crusty on the outside, Marine colonel, and willing to send people up the hill into gunfire if needed, but always that heart of gold, the heart of what is good. So he runs the food pantry. Now he's retired, runs the food pantry. And he told me the story once about a young lady who came in with 3 children, and she was still a teenager. And you might think, well, oh, we know how that happened. And perhaps that is how that happened, that she might have been expecting, but she got married. And the husband is the father of all 3 children. So it isn't that thing that we imagine of somebody who's going to spend her life, who designed her life this way so she could spend it on no, this is a young couple struggling. He had not finished high school. So my friend who runs the food pantry is encouraging him, go get your GED, figure out what you need to do, and take the GED test, and you'll be a high school graduate. You'll have gainful employment, because this guy, he was working in construction. Construction is very good around here. You're well paid, but he was only part-time because he didn't have his GED. And he just didn't need somebody to say, here's some food, go get your GED. He needed somebody to say, well, let's see what's involved. Let's find out what you need to do. Let's see where's the phone number you need to call. Here, let me help you. And at the end, when the guy passed the test, he called the employers, the people who'd been employing this man part-time, and said, hey, did you know this guy got his GED? You can give him a full-time job. And they did. Somebody did. And they stopped coming to the food pantry. That is a successful ministry. That isn't just, here's your meal for today. The old adage of you can give somebody a fish, or he's teaching people how to fish. And so there's so many opportunities around us. There's, first of all, to meet needs. Another ministry across town, and this is where the denominational discussion comes up. You know, so many times we Christians say, oh, you're of that denomination. Oh, and we don't want to, and then we stop listening. But you can't judge that way. You actually have to talk to the person. Is this person a true follower of Christ? So across town, there's a ministry that has a virtual shoe store. They've taken a part of their church and put shelves on it, and there are shoes on the shelves. Any child, low income, can come in, pick out a pair of shoes, and get 2 free pairs of socks twice a year. Where was that ministry when my kids were growing up? 5 kids and shoes, okay? What a great ministry. Now, and that's meeting a need for today, not necessarily lifting people up, but it's meeting an important need. And any resources that would go to shoes can now go somewhere else, to school supplies, to clothing, all kinds of things. There are other churches that do clothing drives, and so my church, we collect shoes. We have a group in our church. We collect shoes for the shoe ministry. We collect peanut butter for the food banking. Peanut butter is not as cheap as it used to be, as I mentioned earlier. It used to be the go-to staple food. It's protein, it's cheap. It's not cheap anymore. So we collect protein and we give to the food pantry. So the idea is what are the other ministries going on in your town? How can you help meet that need? The other idea is, how can you lift people up? And sometimes that involves being in the ministry, being ready to do that. And sometimes it involves just being willing. I have a friend who had 8 children, a nice sized house, not anything fancy, but big enough where you can put 8 kids in there. And she would take in pregnant girls who didn't have any place to go, and she would host them. And she had this little storefront, very pro-life woman. She had a little pro-life storefront, and she had materials in there to pass out to people who wanted to come. And it was kind of a pro-life central place, where if she's doing speaking engagement or something, all of her materials are there and she's ready to go. But she was manning her office one day, and this couple walked in, and they had moved to this area and thinking that he had a job. And when they got here, they realized the job fell through, and they used all their resources to get here, and now they have nothing. They have no place to go, and he has no work. So she let them, and again, I'm sure there were 87 housing code violations here. She let them stay in the office for the night. Then she gave them bedding, pots and pans, whatever they needed. And she gave them first and last month's rent and found them an apartment. Now they have an address. Now they can get assistance from the government, but now they've got their feet under them, and he found a job, and they're completely independent. And that's the difference. How long might they have stayed on the street? It might have turned from days to weeks to months to years, but all they needed was first and last month's rent. Somebody willing to be inconvenienced and to let life be a little messy. Somebody to go home to her household of 10 people and take some of the bedding out of it and the towels and share them, give them to somebody else for a while. It must take a lot of bedding for 8 kids. So, but willing to share, willing to be inconvenienced, willing to help lift somebody up and change their life. Another story I love is from a book by a different author. Laura Schroff wrote a book called Invisible Thread, if you're familiar with that. Laura Schroff was a business executive walking down the street in New York City one day in Manhattan. A little boy says, "Hey lady, you got any change?" And she keeps walking. She made it to the middle of the intersection until she turned around and came back and bought him lunch at McDonald's. And as she's getting to know him, what do you want to be when you grow up? He didn't know. He didn't know because he never knew anybody who had a job before. He didn't have anything except television and his imagination. Everyone around him wasn't having a dream about what they could be when they grow up. And one of the most profound moments in the book is when she invites him to her family's home and her brother's home for Thanksgiving dinner. And he gets a new vision of a dream for his life, because it's the first time he sat at a table and had a meal and listened to people talk. First time he wasn't just handed his food wherever he was sitting. And his vision became, when I grow up, I want to have a family and a table. And there was a whole lot of mess. I'm shortening the story here a little bit, a whole lot of mess and a whole lot of inconvenience. But when he grew up and she went through all the things that she went through in her life. That was the son that she never had. Those were the grandchildren were the grandchildren she never had. That was her family eventually. And all she did was turn around on a street in Manhattan one day and take a kid to McDonald's and get him a meal because he was hungry. So you don't know, first of all, the difference that it would make in his life, but the difference it made in her life. And the other interesting part is that she didn't have a life of perfection when she got there. Her father had all these issues and was alcoholic, and she struggled in school. And the neat part was this kid struggled in school, and she didn't say, well, just work harder or study more, or here's how to study. She said, you know what, I struggled in school too. And he saw for the first, oh, you struggled in school? I struggle in school. But look at you. You're employed. You're a product. Oh. And he became a police officer. He's got a family, sits around the table with every day and has a meal. And what would life have been? And she decided to be inconvenienced and to let her life get messy. And that made all the difference, not only for him, but for her too. It's a beautiful book. It's called The Invisible Thread. Buy my book too. But that story is one of such beauty that first of all, it was helpful to him that her life had not been perfect, because he didn't believe, he understood that it doesn't have to be perfect for you to become an independent, productive person. It's not like all those other people have a perfect life and you don't, and so therefore you can have no dreams of what you want to be. And she said she had to ask him a number of times, what do you think you want to be when you grow up? We ask kids that all the time. What do you want to be when you grow up? And it's just like we expect an answer. We expect them to say a teacher, a fireman. My one son, his dream was to be a railroader. And in Altoona at the time, the railroad was circling, and people laughed. And he grew up and he worked for 5 years at the railroad. The railroad's still circling here. We expect an answer for kids. We expect them to have a vision. And for the longest time, this little boy didn't have a vision. And he had to meet people, and he had to see productive people. He had to interact with them. This is why you can't just send money. Mentoring has to happen. She taught him how to bake a cake. Here's how you notice the basic nature of this. She taught him how to bake a cake. You buy, honestly, bake a cake wasn't this many cups of flour. It's a cake mix. But what he's learning here is to follow the directions. You start with this, and you start with that, and you have to have the right ingredients, and you put it together. And it wasn't McDonald's nuggets that somebody handed him every day. It was actual preparation. That kind of independence that can teach you to do things for yourself. And we don't realize today how many people around us have no vision, because they don't have that interaction. They don't have the mentoring. They don't have the people around them saying, you might struggle in school, you might have it rough at home, you can still become a productive, independent person who's taking care of yourself and taking care of your family. That kind of stuff really makes a difference.
So I know you have a passion for helping people who have gone through the poverty that you have gone through, and that's why you are sharing these stories. So what is it that you currently are really passionate about in helping other people?
Well, there are some really exciting things happening in my town, and some of them I had nothing to do with. One of them is that two pastors got together, and one of them said, why don't we see how many pastors we can get together to pray just for our city, just to pray for our city. They're up to 36 now who meet on a Sunday morning at 6:30 for 30 minutes. And the neat thing that happens when you bring these communities together, there's a church in town that had a $6,000 heating bill. And the pastor was one of these 36 who comes into this community and says, hey, I got a problem. And if I don't solve it, I'm going to have to close my church down for the winter. because we can't pay the heating bill. We can't keep the heat on. But we're having a spaghetti dinner. And my pastor for weeks encouraged us. It was in the bulletin. It was on his Facebook page. Go to the spaghetti dinner. And if you can't go to the spaghetti dinner, just give me a donation. I'll make sure they get it. So my husband and I went to the spaghetti dinner, and the next day we went to church, and the pastor said, they needed 6,000. We didn't know how much they needed. He said it the next day. They needed 6,000. They got 9,000. So, and it's a beautiful church with stained glass windows, ye old classic church, but it's in this little neighborhood people can walk to. So that kind of ministry that can reach out and meet the needs of people who might not even have a car to go to church. So it's really neat, the things that are happening there. The other things that are happening, there's this church doing a feeding ministry here. There's this church moving into the low-income neighborhood. And a really neat thing, there's a church that's outside the city, but they bought an abandoned elementary school inside the city in the poorest neighborhood where the school failed. So the school district closed the school down. The building sat empty for a long time. They just redistributed those children throughout the neighborhood, or throughout the city, the school district actually. Not necessarily acknowledging, maybe it wasn't the school that failed, maybe it's the families dealing with the opioid crisis and all the things that are going on here. What can we fix? Well, what we can do is we can put a ministry in there. And the ministry can offer after school feeding programs, after school care, things like that, summer feeding programs. That's what they're working on. So last year, I went to these folks at this elementary school and I said, let's do a thing called a service fair. And honestly, I don't think I had it named yet. And someone suggested you could rename that. It's not really the best name, but it is a good name in the sense of what it does. We rented the school for the day. They had bouncy houses, so we publicized the bouncy houses will be blown up on this day. We went around town. We solicited donations of money and food. And so we had restaurants and people donating food. We had the guy from the 29th Street, guy who goes to my church, owns the 29th Street Deli in town, volunteered to cook for us. So he shows up ready to cook. And so I just remember the first guy who shows up is a little old man who has to hobble up the hill and just sitting there waiting for the food to be ready. Inside, we invited all kinds of ministries to come set up a table. So you come and you get the free food. If you want, the kids want to use the bouncy houses, you have to walk through, but you walk in front of here's people from the Crisis Pregnancy Center. Here's people from the feeding ministry. Here's people from this ministry, that ministry, the porn addiction ministry, all kinds of ministries, all from all over the city. And people got to find out where they could get help. The state representative, our state senator, sent in all these brochures. Here's how the state can help you. So we're looking and we're planning another one this year, and it's bigger and better. And our plans, we have a petting zoo coming instead of just the bouncy houses. So we're very excited. We want to make it bigger and better and give it, and not have it be, oh, that thing we went to last year. Yeah, well, it's the same thing. No, it's petting zoo's coming, and more ministries. And a basketball tournament, a volleyball tournament. So we added, and an auction. We gave away some baskets last year. We had donations. Well, it's going to be a lot bigger this year. So last year was kind of the practice thing. But to bring in, you know what? I don't struggle with food, but I know somebody with a crisis pregnancy. Yeah, there's some help there. Well, and there's this ministry and that ministry. And there was how to get your kids tuition free into the Christian schools. And the Christian school was there. All these ministries. So that whole kind of outreach kind of thing that says, I don't know what your need is, but let's see what we need to do to identify it and fill it. And that's how we can lift people up. And again, when you do these kinds of things, you start to build relationships with people, and then that's how you can lift them up. So that kind of community effort, first of all, shows people that you care about them. And just that whole sitting down to have a meal with someone, any of those things that you can do. Last week, I was at the March for Life Expo, and I asked my husband, would you please go out and get some lunch? A wonderful Chinese place with rice noodles, spiced chicken. It was great. So I'm sitting there waiting for my rice noodles, my spiced chicken to come back. He took a really long time to come back. So what was up with that? Is my food still hot? And it was, but, or at least the parts that were supposed to be were still warm. He went to a McDonald's because he didn't want Chinese food, and he went to McDonald's and he bought a homeless person a meal, and he sat down with her for a little while. So that whole kind of thing. We have frequently gone to a city and gone into McDonald's first, or any other fast food, not to mess you up with sponsors or whatever. Any fast food, go in and buy a gift card. Buy 5 gift cards if you're visiting a city for a day. Walk the streets. Look for, you won't have to look. They might approach you. You'll find 5 people to give gift cards to. What else are you going to do with a gift card besides buy? Maybe trade it for something. Maybe you trade your gift card for cigarettes. Okay. Well, maybe the guy with the cigarettes is hungry. But if you give somebody a gift card for a fast food restaurant, they get to go in and sit down in a warm place for at least a couple of hours if they stretch it a little. They get to use the bathroom. They get to wash up in the bathroom. So that kind of thing, plus you're encouraging them. So, I mean, think about this. You take the people who were on the street before that my friend helped. You leave them on the street for 3 days. Who will hire him now? He's been in the same clothes and he hasn't had a shower in 3 days. He's unemployable now. That's how you end up on the street. How fast you can get off the street can make a difference. Another example of this is a program they used to have. My understanding is Utah funded this program and then stopped funding it. I don't know what happened in the whatever election that somebody came in and said, let's not do that program anymore. But what they missed was the early history, because Utah was spending $16,000 a year for each homeless person. When they decided, we'll provide you a place to live and we'll give you a mentor, they were spending $11,000. So the cost of homelessness went down. Well, how can there be a cost of homelessness? There's your emergency room. There's wow, it's really cold here, so I think I'll urinate publicly so I can go have a place to live that's warm for about 3 months till all the legal proceedings are done, okay? So all of those expenses that you pay, it actually does add up. And you have people you will mentor who will not succeed. It's still cheaper to house them. You have people that you will mentor who will succeed, and now you don't have to pay to keep them anymore. So again, I'm sad that I understand Utah has discontinued this program, and maybe somebody's got more to the story than that. But I know that Pittsburgh was reaching out in such a way, doing this kind of mentor thing, and that they were working with the churches to do it. And that is a neat fellowship of government and church that I hope none of the secularists complain about, because it's working and it's making a difference for people. So frequently when you're looking for somebody to mentor, you might look in a church, because that's where somebody who wants to help lift people up. And that's where we get to the discussion of the book with the shattered, the restoring the shattered. The main point of the shattered is the glass, that we compare ourselves to a piece of glass that's broken, or even the grains of sand that haven't even yet been formed into the piece of glass. But when God restores, that piece of glass doesn't have any cracks in it anymore. And it's not just sitting on the ground like a piece of glass. It's up in the window. It's part of the picture of the church. And light shines through the glass to show all the other pieces of sand what they can be. Not perfect people, pieces of glass shining the light. So letting the light come through. And this is where you get the community to help lift you into independence, and then you become part of the community to help lift others. Because there's something very key in the story about Laura Schroff, for example. It really mattered that she used to struggle in school. it really mattered that her life hadn't been perfect because it taught him that it was possible. It really mattered that my friend at my church had already started her college classes because that taught me I could do that. Oh, there are others like me. And when I was doing this in 1988 to 1992, they were actually coming up with college programs for what they call the returning adult student. And there was a community there too, that I wasn't sitting there with 18-year-olds in freshman English class. I was, no, I probably was for that class, but anyway, most of my evening classes, there were other returning adults, there were veterans coming back from their military service, other single mothers, so many people who lived some life and then came to college afterwards. And that really made a big difference. Having that friend to help me get started got it all rolling, and then the rest of the community standing there cheering me on. They had a big party for me when I graduated, and it was kind of like a roast, only everybody was really nice, and it was such a blessing to us. It modeled things for the kids. There was another situation that came up that I thought was really a turning point. I was a stay-at-home mom for 11 years, and I went back to work when my baby was 2, and I did not appreciate it. I was sad and brokenhearted. And I remember an incident when I was in a pharmacy getting medicine, and my son said something, and the pharmacist said, "What did he say?" And I said, "I don't know." And he said, "Oh, the mother usually knows." And I thought, well, if I spent all day with my baby the way I did with my other babies, I would have known what he said. I don't think that poor man realized how he broke my heart that day. But there were times when when you're receiving government assistance, you have to check in every so often and make sure that you're doing everything right and the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed. And I went in with my caseworker for one of those appointments, and he said, "You have a child under age 4. You can quit your job." And I said, "Well, he's 3. He's going to be 4 next year." And I'm making more than minimum wage at this job. This is a decent job where, I don't have to get dirty and sweaty. I just have to pass out money and do it right. The do it right part. But anyway, that moment, then there was one more that came with it. I said, I want to model work for my kids. And I knew in my heart of hearts, I wanted to be home with them. I loved being I used to joke around with, my goal in college. And I don't mean this as literally as it sounds, but my goal was to marry money and go back to cookie baking. But I knew I was preparing myself for the workplace. And I didn't marry money anyway, so here we all are. But there was another instance when I was working at the bank, and somebody came in to collect her food stamps. And she told me that she was taking her kids to the beach for the day. And I remembered all the weekdays that I could have taken my kids to. It's a man-made lake here in Pennsylvania. We don't live near the ocean. But I remembered the times that we did that and how I can't do that anymore. And I felt like there was this great injustice in the world that somebody else got to take their kids to the beach and I didn't. But that also I was working and my kids were seeing that. And I think that made a big difference for them when they grew up and they decided how they wanted their lives to be. I think it mattered. And as much as I would have preferred to be home, and I thought it was healthier for my kids that I would be home, I was where God had put me, and I was doing what God had given me to do. And it was difficult, but it seems to have paid off as far as they were concerned.
That's amazing.
Thank you.
So how is it that people can get in contact with you? Are there any ministries that you want to share as we wrap up our time together?
Oh, the ministries that I would love to share. The Nehemiah Project is the one in our city that really it's not, it did not begin with my church. It began with the other church that ended up buying the elementary school. And the whole focus has been, how can we lift people up? And my church is a very good partner with that kind of mentality of getting those churches together, getting the pastors together, that kind of thing. Another one that I can't sign off without mentioning isn't really quite a ministry, but the armed forces. I've been an armed forces mother since my second son, but first soldier, deployed in 2003, and his younger brother, who we thought would never deploy, had never joined the military. Well, he's a major in the Army Reserves now, and that keep the people in your neighborhood in mind, the single mothers. And if you are the single mother, is there someone you can reach out to? Is there a wife whose husband's deployed, a husband whose wife's deployed? How can you encourage them? And I think even when we're going through the difficult times and we're looking for people to encourage us, one of the things that we really want to remember is, it's up to us to encourage other people too, even in our dark times. What can we do? Even if it's just a word, even if it's not necessarily giving, but what can we do to encourage somebody else? Because you don't really know how much difference just even a look on your face of acceptance, that word of encouragement can make. And as far as the book is concerned, it is on Amazon at Nancy E. Head and Restoring the Shattered, Amazon.com, BarnesandNoble.com. And if you go to my website, NancyEhead.com, and you can communicate with me that way. And at the bottom of every blog post is a link to the Barnes & Noble page for the book.
Excellent. And we will also be including that here. So thank you so much, Nancy, for sharing your story and your passion with my audience. I really honor the journey you've been on. I was raised by a single mother, so it's very near and dear to my heart, the challenges that brings and the judgment that can bring as well.
I thank you so much, Gina, for getting the word out. I appreciate it. God bless.
God bless. My pleasure. So ladies and gentlemen who are watching this today, please click down below, subscribe to Feminine Roadmap. All the links that Nancy shared will be down there for you. So you will be able to get to her book. You'll be able to get to her, jot down those ministries. Maybe this is an opportunity for that niggling idea in your mind to start something like that yourself. Having the courage to step out and link arms with other people. Maybe that's something you feel called to do. So don't be afraid. Maybe reach out to the churches that Nancy's talking about and find out how they did, what they did, and to create those resources, ministries, opportunities, support in your own neighborhood. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. We really appreciate the time that you've given to us. We do ask that you share this episode, and please join us again next time. Have a great day, everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.